My husband and I were set to embark on our dream vacation, however. He boarded a separate airplane with his girlfriend as well. I erroneously reserved her seat using a passport on the no-fly list and booked a hotel that exclusively accommodates patients, not guests. I have envisioned this trip for years as a flawless escape where reality merges with a sun-drenched fantasy. Quiet mornings at an Italian villa, afternoons wandering through cobblestone alleyways, and evenings beneath a starry sky accompanied by a glass of exquisite wine. Every feature was thoughtfully designed. From the opulent coastal resort to the concealed treasures known only to locals. It was not merely a vacation, it was the climax. Years spent in anticipation for this moment had rendered Daniel, my husband, seemingly diminished. His passion for the planning was tepid, and his replies to my excitement were lackluster. His musings were, at best, incoherent. I attributed it to his professional lifestyle. Suppressing an individual's spirit, he was perpetually immersed in meetings, incessantly replying to emails, and his phone was. He assured me that it was merely stress, stating that once we arrived, I would finally relax, as if it were an extension of his arm. Absently kissing my forehead, you will observe that treason incurs repercussions. Occasionally, justice manifests in unforeseen manners. If you appreciate narratives of meticulous retribution and surprising developments, be sure to engage with them. Subscription is complimentary and guarantees you will not miss any captivating narratives. Now, let us go. I wished to trust him. I persuaded myself that his detachment was not related to us, but rather that he merely required this escape. Although I cherished love, it caused you to perceive reality in gentler tones, blurring the contours of unease, leading me to overlook the minutiae, holes in our flawless image. Convincing myself they were merely shadows, the airport resonated with an accustomed form of pandemonium. The soft murmur of announcements, the hurried footsteps of travelers, the aroma of freshly prepared coffee. As I stood in line with my passport in hand, the aroma of coffee intertwined with the brisk, conditioned air, and excitement surged within me. Beneath my skin, this signified the beginning of our journey. Daniel had exhibited greater emotional distance that morning than is customary. He frequently checked his watch, fidgeting with his phone and bouncing his knee in impatience. I attempted to alleviate the tension. The atmosphere, playfully urging him, suggested excitement. I provoked a smile. Yet it remained elusive. A brief flicker of anxiety stirred in my abdomen as our eyes met. An anomaly was present, although before I could contemplate it, we proceeded, passports submitted and tickets scanned. As we arrived at security in Italy, Daniel leaned in and quickly kissed my cheek, indicating a brief, distracted farewell. You are at the gate. I must take a brief call. I nodded, without contemplating it further, as work had always accompanied him. One final call, and then he will be mine for 2 weeks. I reassured myself as I navigated through security. Casting a glance over my shoulder, I placed my suitcase on the conveyor belt while Daniel was already turning away. His phone close to his ear. His look. I located our gate, took a seat, and checked my phone. There were no messages. Daniel remained absent from view for 15 minutes. Then 30, prompting a sense of unease within me. An unnamed sensation constricted around my ribcage, intensifying with each instant I contacted him. I reached your voicemail and sent an SMS regarding boarding shortly. Where are you? No response received. The boarding announcement resonated overhead as I stood at the edge of the queue, surveying the crowd with a racing heart. My heart raced as my fingers hovered over the screen, contemplating whether to call again when my phone vibrated. Message from my best friend Sophie. I am uncertain how to convey this. But Daniel's, not on your flight, for a time. I was unable to comprehend the words as my mind struggled to make sense of them. I inquired about the content I was reading on my flight, seeking clarification on her meaning, and responded promptly. What are you referring to? 3 dots emerged, then vanished, then subsequently reappeared. My breathing became shallow. My grip on the phone tightened when the message arrived. I just saw him. He is boarding an aircraft. But not yours. And he is. I was not alone. My stomach twisted fiercely, and a chilly, creeping sensation went through me. My limbs were numbing. My fingers rendered immobile. This was implausible. As he was scheduled to meet me at the gate. He had to be present somewhere. I turned. Surveying the multitude of faces, however. I already recognized that Sophie would not have dispatched this. Unless she was certain. I swallowed audibly and compelled myself to type. Who is he with the? The response was instantaneous. A younger brunette woman was laughing with him. With his arm around her. The world tilted slightly, and the peripheries of my vision blurred as if my mind resisted processing the. The reality is, I was unable to breathe when the final boarding call resonated from the speakers. The queue was progressing as individuals passed by, presenting their tickets before boarding the aircraft, intended to transport both of us to the life marijuana plan. Daniel was not forthcoming. Daniel had never intended to. He had deceived me. And now he was abandoning me as he departed for paradise with another. I inhaled deeply, compelling air into my lungs. I resolved not to succumb to the burden of realization. My fingers quivered as I clutched my ticket. I faced a choice. I am complimentary on the aircraft to Italy alone to heal my wounds in solitude. I might remain and ensure. Daniel experienced the profound sensation of having his universe shattered. His hand clenched into a fist. Nails embedded into his skin. I was determined not to cry, shout, or succumb to despair. If Daniel thinks he can humiliate and dismiss me as an afterthought while he confidently moves forward, it will shatter him. The sunset with another individual revealed his significant miscalculation. As he was not the sole person adept at playing games, I was on the verge of redefining the rules in the final seconds of the deception I initiated. My heel, my thoughts already whirling, calculated as the flight attendant announced, "Ma'am, final boarding." I smiled sweetly. A serene and collected woman, devoid of concerns, whose heart had not been fragmented into countless pieces. I stated, as I returned my boarding card to my handbag, that I would not be traveling today. And with that, I departed, undeterred. Daniel may have boarded another flight, but he was not abandoned, but prepared. He was unaware of what awaited him upon landing. As I departed from the gate, my heartbeat felt abnormally elevated. Calm, as if my body had preemptively acknowledged the betrayal before my mind had completely comprehended it. The discourse of travelers diminished into a distant murmur, the glossy flooring mirroring the artificial illumination of the airport lights. I felt a sense of emptiness. Yet an undercurrent of something frigid and incisive lingered. The world had transformed beneath my feet, and whilst the former version of me may have succumbed, this current iteration stands resolute here. With the phone in my hand, this version of myself was ready to change the game's rules in the wake of deception. Served as both a lifeline and a weapon, which I grasped firmly, my fingers reacting almost reflexively to Sophie's messages. It seemed on the screen as incontrovertible evidence, however. I required further confirmation. I needed to witness it firsthand. My legs propelled me forward. I walked through the terminal, past rows of apathetic travelers, until I arrived at the enormous computerized flight display. Illuminated numerals in vivid yellow contrasted sharply with the dark screen, indicating that my trip to Italy was now at final boarding. However, perusing the list diverted my focus until I located his flight. New airline, new destination, Gate 23. I turned without hesitation. Hesitation navigated through the crowd with an unexpected intensity. Each stride drew me nearer. To be honest, my mind is replaying every incident that occurred before this, highlighting every warning sign I had missed. The nocturnal hours, the clandestine phone conversations, the manner in which he distanced himself while feigning normalcy. How? It was silly of me to trust his justifications. The gate came into view. And so did he. Daniel stood there, comfortable, with one hand in his pocket and the other holding his phone. A woman draped over his arm as if she belonged there. I had never seen her before, yet I instinctively recognized her. She was lovely in a conventional manner. With long dark features, her hair framed a crisp, trained smile, exuding a confidence derived from the knowledge that she had secured something to which she was never entitled. She leaned into him, whispering something in his ear, and he laughed, not the courteous chuckle he had previously displayed during our conversation. created dating nights that elicited effortless, authentic laughter, indicative of comfort. For a brief moment of familiarity, I felt immobilized, my breath caught, and my fingers. I twitched but did not waver. Instead, I allowed the moments to permeate my consciousness, imprinting the image of them together into my memory. My response indicated that there was no misconception and no ambiguity. This misunderstanding constituted betrayal, and it was now my obligation to react. I could have approached them and created a commotion, requested explanations, although such a response would have been an impulsive emotional reaction that would satisfy nothing. I desired something more, something deliberate, something that would guarantee that when he would be the one amidst the ruins once this concluded. As I withdrew into the shadows at the terminal, I observed them as they passed me into the jet bridge to board his flight. His hand rested on the small of her back, directing her forward as if she were meant to be there. It was almost poetically twisted, the manner in which he believed he had triumphed, evading repercussions. He outmaneuvered me, unaware that he had just entered the initial phase of his demise. I pivoted on my heel and I departed, my mind already engaged in calculation and scheming. There was no room for sadness, only purpose that Daniel had established. His deception was executed with precision, concealing his goals beneath a meticulously constructed facade. Nonetheless, it was now my turn to create a reality that is not a falsehood but a truth so profoundly impactful and intricately crafted that he would lament its existence, believing he might surpass me. Sophie's name appeared on my computer, and I responded without a welcome, inquiring how long ago they had contacted me. I was bored, my voice was composed, yet there was an underlying sharpness, a thread of something unyielding. Are you present now? She hesitated, seemingly apprehensive about my potential reaction. I will be. Taking a big breath to compose myself. I required a favor. Sophie did not inquire as to why. Question my abrupt change in demeanor. That is what solidified her status as my closest friend. She understood me and recognized when something had altered. Inquire further. I traversed the terminal with urgency, my strides imbued with an unfamiliar feeling of purpose. Exhilarating. I require you to get comprehensive information on the woman accompanying him, including her name and social ties. I require access to his trip itinerary, including bookings and reservations. There was a brief delay during which Sophie likely contemplated whether to interrogate me. Nonetheless, she ultimately stated, "Allow me 30 minutes." I concluded the call and resumed my contemplative walk, assembling the subsequent moves. Treachery was a strategic game, and Daniel had executed his initial move. However, he had committed one critical error. He misjudged my capabilities. Fury or instinct did not drive revenge. Concerning the act of levying allegations or soliciting apologies, it was mostly about ensuring that the one who transgressed against you experienced the repercussions. Not in a singular moment of remorse culminated in a sequence of meticulously orchestrated repercussions that rendered them without an escape. Daniel had departed from my life. Isolated in an airport, neglected like a mere afterthought, he had entered. That individual believed he had triumphed when boarding the aircraft. Yet upon landing, the world he presumed he had fled to would not be the utopia he envisioned. I envisioned myself as the patient individual in our relationship, the understanding partner, the one who facilitated harmony over every rough edge, who forgave and compromised. Nonetheless, that version of me disappeared the moment he boarded a different flight. The new version of myself was poised to demonstrate to Daniel precisely what transpires when one underestimates. I sat in the rear of the airport cafe, my fingers tapping the rim of my coffee cup, my thoughts functioning at the velocity I had never encountered before. The betrayal had ingrained itself not as a burdensome weight but as a source of motivation with every breath. I was incisive. Every thought was intentional. The version of myself that before dulled the imperfections of Daniel was. What remained was a lady meticulously crafting her revenge with precision, as articulated in Sophie's letter. Arrived 20 minutes later. Her name is Lisa Whitman, and she works in public relations. No significant issues. Her interactions with Daniel were largely private. She meticulously controls her social media. Yet it reveals enough information to suggest attachment. There were screenshots of Lisa at several gatherings. Her arm connected with individuals significant in corporate circles, displaying the same demeanor. Her refined smile indicated that she was not merely a fleeting romance. She was someone who comprehended the intricacies of the situation. Which was acceptable to me. I performed better. I responded regarding Daniel's bookings. And the reply was prompt. Your thoughts were correct. They are en route to a private resort in Santorini, with a complete itinerary reserved under his business. He utilized his points to enhance their stay, presumably covering the expenses of their anniversary vacation and romantic break. Remained constant. I anticipated nothing less. I inhaled deeply, pulling my shoulders back and allowing the cool air to envelop me. He believed he had orchestrated everything flawlessly. That was his initial error. The second was assuming I. Upon receiving no response, I accessed the airline's website, signed into our joint account, and commenced making my own modifications. Lisa's flight plan would not directly get her to paradise, however. A few strategic tweaks later. It may. Daniel's ideal week would begin with a disruption to his travel plans. Unfolding before him was the resort, whose policies I was well acquainted with. I meticulously researched every aspect when organizing our anticipated dream trip, and a direct call to the management corroborated my findings. Our guest standards are stringent. Ma'am, if there has been a name discrepancy, the previous reservation remains in effect. Presence is required to amend the reservation. A gradual smile emerged, indicating that if Lisa arrived alone first, she would discover. She found herself in a compelling position. One that Daniel could not resolve from a distance. I terminated the call and, concentrating on the subsequent action, my fingers glided over my phone screen, contacting another someone who was indebted to me. I requested a temporary flag on my passport. It is not a significant matter. But I did not want to waste time when they answered the call. To induce inconvenience, pause, then emit a little giggle. That may be arranged. I recline. Lisa was relieved that she would not be traveling anywhere near Santorini, especially after being inexplicably flagged by Fork Travel. Daniel would remain stranded, bewildered, and utterly vulnerable for the duration of her detention. Envision Daniel's arrival in Santorini, anticipating opulence and her presence. He stated he would be isolated. His calls would be unsuccessful, and his annoyance would escalate, culminating in an additional aggravation. The culmination of my creation, Daniel's business universe, was founded on perception. Image was paramount to his reputation. Was immaculate, meticulously preserved, with not a single wrinkle amiss. Nonetheless, what transpired? He mistakenly sent his vacation details to the wrong inbox, possibly to key individuals at his office. Nothing dramatic, but a courteous confirmation email regarding his previous activities. A romantic retreat with Miss Lisa Whitman. I exhaled. Wonderful. This was not destruction. It was not a public show, but something superior. Disentangling a gradual, systematic disintegration of all he had constructed via deceit. As I sipped the last of my coffee, Daniel sat alone in paradise, his world crumbling around him. My flight was no longer to Italy. Instead, it was to another destination, close enough to observe the entire process, as the most remarkable aspect of a masterpiece was not merely its creation, but his presence while it. Upon my return, I admired the artistry as my airplane landed smoothly, coinciding with the sun's gradual drop. The warm Mediterranean air enveloped me as soon as I exited the station. Yet it was not. Relaxation transformed into eagerness. Every action I initiated was. Daniel's fantasy trip has commenced, and I am positioned nearby to observe it personally. What he perceived was that I had acclimated to my boutique hotel. A stark contrast to the 5-star paradise he experienced. Designated for himself and Lisa, I did not require luxury, but rather control and from. I witnessed the disintegration of his preparations up close. The initial disturbance occurred sooner than anticipated. A notification appeared on my phone regarding a travel restriction notice issued by Lisa Whitman. A smile graced my lips. The plan had succeeded. Lisa was not approaching Santorini while Daniel was indulging champagne in first class. Blissfully oblivious, Lisa was probably pacing inside the airport office inquired about the rapid transformation of her travel permission into a bureaucratic ordeal. Moment vividly her refined demeanor faltering as the gravity of her predicament became apparent. The bewilderment transitioning to frustration was evident in her voice as airport security reiterated that there was nothing they could do. She was not authorized to board. As the hours elapsed, her calls went directly to voicemail, and her messages were marked as seen. However, it remained unanswered because Daniel was not yet checking his phone. Disembarking the plane and inhaling the briny island air, he likely anticipated seeing Lisa awaiting him at baggage claim. She was attired in something effortlessly exquisite, prepared to embark on their romantic escape. Yet she was absent, and that was the initial fracture in his idea of control. I awaited. As patience was paramount, revenge was not solely concerned with impact, it also hinged on timing. An hour later, the texts emerged. Commenced inundation. Lisa, please contact me. There is an issue with my flight. I am unable to depart from the airport as they are prohibiting my boarding. This is absurd. Lisa. Daniel, where are you? Lisa, respond to me. I could nearly perceive the change in her tone. Confusion transitioned to rage, followed by anxiety, and after an additional 30 minutes, Daniel's initial. I exhaled slowly while observing the display of my burner phone, which I had utilized for forwarding. Daniel's schedule to his office guarantees that someone there would observe the very compromising facts of his. Lisa's phone rang twice, followed by 3 additional rings. I anticipated her response with certainty. Upon answering, she was oblivious to the situation and lacked comprehension. I merely need him to rectify the issue. But Daniel was no longer the problem solver. As he struggled to find a solution, Daniel's resort reservation was being affected by the onset of the second wave of turmoil. Had reserved the most luxurious suite, including expansive ocean views and a private terrace, designed to wow. Nonetheless, the reservations were not as flexible as he anticipated. And when Lisa, the expected guest, did not arrive, it caused an issue. Envisioned him arriving at the check-in counter, beaming, and presenting his credit card, anticipating an introduction to opulence. Instead, he would hear the receptionist's pleasant yet assertive voice, "I'm sorry, sir, the booking was registered under 2 visitors. We cannot verify check-in without the presence of both individuals. Which has caused his aggravation. Flair, could you clarify? I made the reservation, and my name is listed. Please charge my account. This card contains an error." And they would express their apologies and understanding. However, the regulations were unequivocal. The policy was explicit with no exceptions. Lisa was required to attend. The room remains to be confirmed. And Lisa will not be attending. I sip my coffee while observing the waves crashing from my hotel balcony, awaiting the subsequent inevitable action in his frantic endeavor to rectify all matters. Calls to Lisa remained unanswered as she remained ensnared in travel limbo. Her hands constrained by a problem beyond her control. Articulate her dissatisfaction directed specifically at Daniel. As his communications became increasingly brief. Daniel, it is cooler. Where are you? Why is your flight delayed? Lisa, this is concerning. If it is not amusing, then panic would ensue. Not concerning Lisa. Daniel was not apprehensive. He was concerned for her but primarily preoccupied with his own perception and feelings. Standing there in realization, lacked space, lacked a contingency plan, and lacked comprehension of how everything had deteriorated so rapidly. Then, precisely on cue, the office would receive the sent itinerary, which I envisioned arriving first in his assistant's inbox as a standard procedure. Verify travel charges on the confirmation of a romantic stay for 2. Initially, Century Resort may seem inconsequential, merely another excursion with a receipt to record, until an individual observed the incorrect name adjacent to his, followed by a gradual recognition. As Daniel began to experience it, the unraveling commenced, prompting me to set my phone aside. The latter phase of his decline was commencing. And I was merely initiating my efforts. Daniel's patience was deteriorating. The quiet between his desperate texts and my refusal to answer felt palpable. Like a noose, even from miles away, constraining his meticulously organized reality. He had reached his resort with anticipation. Luxury anticipated Lisa's flawless escape. Instead, he was standing. It was almost poetic to be at the front desk of an establishment that refused to recognize his reservation. Lisa. She had been prohibited from boarding. And during her last attempt to contact him, she remained confined in an airport office, engaging in disputes with others who were unable to assist her. Daniel, in contrast, found himself solitary in paradise, gradually coming to the realization that matters were deteriorating beyond his control. Although I had not concluded my efforts, the resort personnel adhered to protocol, denying him access. His irritation at checking in without his second guest must have been evident. Yet rules were rules. He must have resisted it. Initially, he attempted to reason with them. But a five-star establishment did not accommodate inconvenienced visitors. He could not just. He hurled his credit card at them and insisted on exceptions. That was not how the world operated. And Daniel, despite his bravado, understood this. He had never acquired the skills to navigate a system that would not accommodate him, hence. He departed. I had foreseen this decision. This was precisely why I had orchestrated a minor detour for him. Sanini was exquisite, however. The luxury hotels had been fully booked weeks in advance. At times, months in advance, and lacking a confirmed reservation. Daniel found himself without a destination. He must have departed from. While holding lobby luggage and browsing through his phone with increasing desperation. That is when he would have. Of course, his workplace did not issue the email confirming a last-minute reservation. Hadn't I delivered a precisely articulated, meticulously crafted email, effortlessly integrating with his customary reservation habits? A private hideaway featuring five-star accommodations in a covert manner. Secluded and removed from tourist attractions. Precisely the type of establishment suited for a gentleman. His position would opt for an unforeseen alteration of plans, yet. This hotel was not intended for holidaymakers. It was a healing resort. However, not the type he would have anticipated. I had meticulously chosen an establishment with stringent entrance methods tailored for guests pursuing an extended stay. A facility intended not for transient visitors but for individuals seeking a longer-term residence. Seeking a more structured setting. The type of hotel where once checked in, departure is not easily facilitated. Daniel, in his despair, he must have clicked on the confirmation without scrutiny and then immersed himself in the initial. A taxi was available. Anxious to rescue what remained of his ideal holiday, he would have arrived at the facility with luggage. The tone was itchy yet relieved, and I envisioned the reception the minute he entered, with the doors closing behind him. The atmosphere is tranquil and sterile, with soft, calming music playing quietly in the background. A woman seated at the counter, attired in subdued hues, smiled courteously as he approached. "Welcome, Mr. Daniels," she would have said, casually mispronouncing his name. "We have been anticipating your arrival." And that is when the front desk staff would have commenced the realization by taking his passport, providing reassurances as they directed him. During the admissions procedure, a deliberate and systematic checklist intended for long-term guests would have been observed. The absence of a genuine concierge, the lack of travelers with baggage similar to his, and the manner in which the doors behind him secured. With a subtle yet decisive click, his irritation would have surged, indicating that a mistake had occurred. I contended that I did not make this reservation. I only require accommodation for the night. The receptionist would have spoken in that same rehearsed, calming manner. Let us review a few brief procedures before we proceed. Conclude your stay, after which the confiscation of personal items, including phones, will occur. Wallets serve as luggage for the secure storage of items, naturally. This is when the discomfort would have shown in the realization that something was amiss, but by that time, he would have already pursued them down the corridor, completed the forms, and been present, escorted to a room intended for rehabilitation, which was secured from the exterior. Daniel had been searching for I had provided him with an escape while I sat in my hotel room. sipping wine and looking around. I observed my phone as his urgent texts arrived. But this time they were not directed to Lisa. Initially, they expressed confusion, inquiring, "Daniel, where are you? My booking has been disrupted." And subsequently, it became demanding, "Daniel, please call me immediately. I believe there has been an error with my reservation. Daniel, I am in a state of borderline panic. I require your assistance as they are preventing my departure." Ultimately, when the realization must have fully settled, I received the one message I had anticipated: "Daniel, you accomplished this." I smiled. He had. It was resolved after considerable time, initially including denial followed by attempts to rationalize the situation. Establishments such as this did not function on conventional reasoning. They conformed to protocols governed by stringent restrictions. Daniel's perseverance would yield no results. Lisa was unresponsive to his calls as she was preoccupied with her own issues. The travel ban ensnared her in a bureaucratic quagmire, leaving her perplexed regarding the sudden flagging of her passport. As a constrained traveler, she was confined in a far corner of the planet, rendering them both unable to connect. The stillness between his texts prolonged while I savored the victory. And then eventually, I composed my reply. "Enjoy your vacation, sweetheart. I ensured it will be unforgettable." The chat indicated he was typing, subsequently pausing and resuming typing. I envisioned him positioned in that tranquil, antiseptic chamber, the understanding dawning upon him. Profoundly ingrained in his being was the realization that he had relinquished control and that the woman he had forsaken at the airport had transformed into the. He was plotting his downfall, indicating that this was not merely retribution but rather a lesson. Deception is not determined by who executes the game more skillfully but rather by who anticipates the conclusion beforehand. Daniel's messages ceased, not because of his resignation. But they confiscated his phone, wallet, identification, and all traces of autonomy due to a lack of alternatives. He had grasped it, I imagine, the instant he comprehended that there was no facile way out. "Cater first, and he would have back," said, insisting on leave while disputing with the staff. He was indeed a troublesome visitor, nonetheless. The nature of a wellness retreat entails. Instead of treating these guests like travelers, they treated them like patients and restricted their freedom to move or walk. The intake process would have been courteous yet assertive, with explanations provided in gentle, measured tones. He had freely enrolled in an immersion rehabilitation program, and his reservation was confirmed. The signed paperwork rendered Daniel's stay indefinite. He would have initially responded with a forced, humorless giggle. "It has been an error. I only require a motel for the night." And the receptionist has been exceedingly patient. Mr. Daniels would have nodded in understanding. Ever accommodating. Numerous people have this sentiment upon arriving. Acclimatization requires time. The term would have instilled a chill in his spine. It was at that moment the truth of his new vacation would have struck him. No luxury. No exclusive pool. No camels during dinners with Lisa. Solely a clinically supervised setting intended for individuals in recovery. "You must have attempted once again. No, you fail to comprehend. I am not meant to be here. As I did not reserve this location." But they possessed the documentation. A comprehensive intake form completed with all his personal information and travel history. Construct a plausible yet wholly fictitious profile of a highly competent executive. A man who had ultimately acknowledged the need for assistance regarding his alleged issues with impulse control and deceitfulness. Rehabilitation for his compulsive behavior, which had evidently started to disrupt his professional life. In personal interactions, inquiries would eventually arise regarding a reserved individual. In a pristine white coat, she would have sat beside him, notebook in hand, scrutinizing Daniel as if he were a riddle to be solved. "Mr. Daniels, when did you first recognize your challenges in sustaining trust within your relationships?" Daniel would have scoffed while reclining in his chair, asserting, "I do not have a trust issue. This is absurd. Denial is." On average, the man would have written something down. But Daniel's jaw would have clenched, indicating that there was none. "I should not be here. Contact my assistant to resolve this matter." The doctor, at this point, would be perceived by Daniel as having inclined his head. contemplating if he frequently relies on others. Relying on others to resolve your issues can lead to unwittingly falling into their psychological snare. Each protest and every effort to establish control would have been systematically reinterpreted as manifestations of his condition. Defensiveness indicates resistance to treatment. Irritation serves as evidence of his condition. Grappling with latent stressors and his inability to recognize the circumstances. He exhibited classic avoidance behavior upon entering a space intended to provoke self-reflection. And I had ensured this outcome. They had every justification to interrogate him. Upon returning to my hotel, I checked my phone and discovered a new email notification had arrived. Subject line: concise yet gratifying. Mr. Daniels has successfully enrolled in our program, and we expect a fruitful outcome. I contemplated the words for an extended period. Allowing their significance to resonate, Daniel was not escaping that situation. The institution and his ordeal was merely commencing. Concurrently, Lisa was present in her personal rendition of purgatory. Marooned at an airport devoid of definitive answers, she must have experienced every phase of frustration, contacting each of her connections, appealing, bargaining, and cursing. However, flagged passports were not mere bureaucratic blunders, they necessitated clearance checks. And until travel was prohibited without exceptions, I could only envision her fury when she. Ultimately, it became evident that this was not a mere coincidence. Someone had intentionally caused this to her. Someone had acted with intent. But Lisa was no longer my problem. She had opted to align herself with Daniel. She was involved with a man who constructed his reality on deception. And now she was experiencing the consequences of that world. Collapsed, Daniel found himself in a realm where his words wielded no influence. Where each argument he presented was translated as proof of his condition. And every door that secured itself behind him was a reminder of his loss as he laid his phone down and exhaled deeply. This was not solely about retribution, it concerned equilibrium. Daniel had devoted years to believing he could control the world, manipulate individuals to fulfill his desires and devise his own escape routes whenever circumstances turned unfavorable. However, he had never anticipated to be outmaneuvered, never anticipated that someone could foresee his every action, that his own hubris would be in an attempt to ensnare him. He had embarked on a flight, convinced he was departing from his past errors. However, he had not. Daniel walked directly into the gravest error of his existence. There was no one remaining to rescue him. He had always excelled by donning masks. He could feign a smile, manipulate situations to extricate himself from difficult predicaments, and distort the truth to a sufficient degree to portray himself as the victim. Although he never comprehended the fragility of an illusion when I applied the right amount of pressure and did it flawlessly, smashing Lisa's luxury escape. His purported rehabilitation retreat detaining him forever becomes the culminating act of my meticulously crafted masterpiece. Was initiated at the instant that would dismantle whatever remnants of the persona Daniel had diligently constructed. I tap my phone screen to access my email drafts, which were meticulously prepared, awaiting the opportune moment for dispatch. Meticulously crafted communication that included sufficient evidence to guarantee that the appropriate individuals would pay attention. List of recipients: Daniel's colleagues, his clients, his supervisor, and the company's board. Member MERS encompassed all individuals upon whose confidence and esteem he relied. Subject: urgent confidential business trip exposure. Recent anomalies have emerged concerning Mr. Daniel Carter's most recent business travel while representing the corporation. Managed the financial components of this visit, revealing a substantial divergence from the declared. The objective of his leave is included, along with paperwork confirming an itinerary for a personal engagement, which includes luxury resort lodgings registered under a non-work rated guest's identity may necessitate prompt care. The company's stringent regulations regarding professional conduct and cost allocation are of utmost significance. I have included the documents I acquired and edited. They are not phony. Exaggerated a modicum of truth to inflict irreversible harm. With a deep breath, I hovered over the submit button, relishing the moment before ultimately pressing it. It was done. Daniel had been revealed. I imagined the sequence of events. The company would receive the email, and inquiries would arise within minutes. Corporate finance would identify his costs upon a cursory review, would disclose that his corporate retreat was merely a personal excursion financed by the company's funds. His supervisor would demand answers. But Daniel would be unavailable to react because he was still confined within the facilities I had designated for him. By the time he had access to a phone, his name would have already been. His immaculate reputation was marred. He would attempt to elucidate, distort the narrative, assert a misunderstanding, and declare it a mistake. However, the harm had already occurred, and no corporation desired an association. An employee with credibility concerns deterred clients from associating with someone mired in trouble. His boss, his investors, and those who formerly respected him would no longer accept his reasons. As he was not merely a cheater, he was a liability. His life had crumbled suddenly. And I sat in my hotel room, observing the Mediterranean waves collide with the shore while sipping coffee. The ultimate disintegration of Daniel Carter was never solely about retribution, it was regarding justice for each falsehood he had uttered. For every instance he had diminished my worth. For every act of treachery he had committed. Believed he could evade repercussions indefinitely. But ultimately, no one eludes consequences perpetually. And Daniel had just. I discovered this firsthand, as I reclined. The Mediterranean sun cast a golden hue over the sea. The saline breeze tousled my hair, rendering the world distinctly altered and more buoyant. Instead of Daniel's destruction, I felt liberated from his deceit for the first time. For years, I experienced a sense of control as my phone remained silently on the table beside me. There were no more urgent texts or desperate calls. Daniel had vanished into the abyss of his own creation. The world around him had progressed in his absence. His co-workers had received the email announcing the company's launch of an internal investigation of his misappropriated monies and their impact on his professional image. Transform into a liability abruptly. The whispers had already initiated board member involvement, interrogating his judgment, ethics, and future. Lisa, still stranded, had ceased all attempts to contact him. Perhaps she had come to terms with the truth. Ultimately, she comprehended that she was merely a pawn in his scheme. Or perhaps she was preoccupied. Self-preservation was the defining characteristic of individuals like Lisa and Daniel. They were of the same ilk. Appearances were based on convenience and self-preservation. There was no genuine devotion between them. Only an illusion. They utilized it as long as it fulfilled their requirements. Neither possessed anything further to provide the other. Daniel was ensnared, isolated. He observed the disintegration of what he had constructed, while Lisa was left to gather the remnants of her existence, wagered on someone who had no intention of remaining. Yet I found myself precisely where I desired to be. I took another sip. As I savor my coffee, I let its warmth permeate my being, reminiscent of my former self, the woman who had both given and forgiven. She had entered the airport that day, anticipating a fantasy, although she had placed her faith in promises that were never genuine. She vacationed with the man she loved and emerged as a fundamentally transformed individual. One who perceived reality with clarity. They recognized her value, her strength, and her capacity to manipulate the situation to her advantage. I did not require verification of this. I no longer required the phone, since I had already composed my own conclusion, one in which Daniel was abandoned. Amidst the devastation he had wrought, I departed more resilient and astute. Free.